My name is Dr. Anthony Kinslow II. I'm here to speak about equity and community building here at Baltimore Climate Tech 2025. First, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a proud North Carolina A&T graduate. Let's go Aggies. I've completed my master's and PhD in sustainable design and construction at Stanford University, where I am also a lecturer here, where I teach on two courses. First, called Quest for an Inclusive Clean Energy Economies, and the second, Racial Equity in Energy. And then lastly, I started a company called Gemini Energy Solutions. And the purpose of starting my company was really just to focus on with a simple theory of change, and that is that the more people can have an impact in clean energy, the faster we can have this clean energy transition realized. And so we focus on what we call democratizing pathways to clean energy, or or supporting communities to take advantage and grasp climate wealth. So these are two tenets that we focus on: democratization and obtaining climate wealth. The title of this slide of this presentation is Equity and Community Building. And I think it's important to understand there's four principal dimensions of equity. The first being recognition, the idea of understanding where a community is, their advantages, the disadvantages, their assets and deficits, and how that all impacts the design of solutions or policy. The second being procedural equity, this idea of the actual design of programs, policies, and processes, and the inclusion of the community in that design. Next is distributional equity, which is the actual the form of distributing the resources, distributing the solutions, whether that be who's doing the work, how is it being marketed, what languages are being used, and lastly, restorative equity, values added to parties in particular. Whenever a solution is being done, a value is being added. Where is that value? Where is that money is going to? Is where restorative equity comes into play. Is it going to those who have historically not had that value come to them? So once again, community buildings for me, community building is community decarbonization, right? Equity and community building. Community building for me is community decarbonization. I feel that they are intertwined. And when I think of community decarbonization, I'm going to be talking to 3 points or 4 points today. 4, access to inclusive financing solutions. 2, resiliency. 3, revenue generating entity for the community. And 4, empowering local businesses and local workforce. That these 4 tenets I will be kind of speaking to today in the framework of community building and community decarbonization. So what does decarbonization entail? First off, it's important to understand that today, for us to decarbonize, the expectation is every single person will spend their own money, either with cash or a loan, to implement all of these different decarbonization metrics. And that comes to electrify your home. It's about $25,000, give or take, and roughly $5,000 in federal tax credits. But if you wanted to go in further and do a solar battery and EV, that's an additional $45,000 with about $15,000 in tax credits. So a total of around $70,000 to decarbonize a household. Well, if you think about what percentage of people are comfortable with doing that and are able to do that, you see the results being that less than 1% of folks take a loan out to decarbonize their property. And in fact, this should be no surprise because 55% of American households achieve less than that $70,000 in their annual income. If you look at African Americans in particular, 75% African Americans do not make over $70,000 annual income. So this idea of expecting everyone to just fork up this money to decarbonize across the 120 million single-family households, the 4+ million apartment buildings, et cetera, that span across this country, doesn't really make a lot of sense. But here's a better look at some of the technologies that are inherent in decarbonization, right? You need thermostats for water heater, LEDs, uh, insulation and air sealing, heat pumps. All these are essential to building decarbonization. But what if I told you there was a way to have all this put into your home without any upfront cost, right? That is where inclusive utility investment solution comes in. The concept being that the utility pays for the upgrades in the home and recovers that cost based on the savings with a tariff on your bill. So, when you look at your utility bill, you see all these different line items. Imagine just another line item for a certain amount of money that is calculated over 10 years, 15 years to pay back the investment. And that tariff, that line item is going to be less than what the savings are going to be. And most policies for this solution is 80% the value of the savings. So you're getting all these upgrades for free with a 20% savings. And some key points of this: it's available to all households, renters and owners alike. It's not based on customers' personal characteristics like income or credit score, right? And it's not a debt solution. In other words, if someone moves from that home, that payment stays on the bill. It does not follow them. They do not have to continue paying that even though they're no longer in the house. And lastly, it is applicable to all clean energy solutions. So all the technologies that I showed briefly before can be applied in this model. And this inclusive utility investment is being used in places like North Carolina, St. Louis, Massachusetts, Arkansas, right? California soon is, and so this type of solution can drastically change the paradigm of how we decarbonize. And then what does it look like in terms of effectiveness? Well, if you look at, I mentioned loans, less than 1%, it's actually around 0.1% of uh, eligible customers take advantage of a loan to decarbonize their property. In contrast, you see orders of magnitude higher adoption rates in areas like Ouachita Electric Cooperative or Roanoke Electric Cooperative. Now, Roanoke Electric Cooperative is a majority Black county, serves a majority Black county in a persistent poverty area, and is still having that level of adoption. That gives you an idea of what this could possibly be. And it's also important to understand that it's called an inclusive utility investment, but inclusive does not necessarily mean equitable, right? Equitable start thinking about distributional equity around who's doing the work. Are you ensuring that minority contractors are having access to be able to do this work, are certified to be able to do this work? Who are you targeting for these solutions in terms of marketing? Making sure everyone is aware of this solution because it works for everyone. Excuse me. And another benefit of that is that some of the existing state incentives of Maryland can be applied and stacked on top of inclusive utility investment. So if the cost of upgrading is $20,000, but the savings will only be $15,000, well, maybe adding some of these credits and incentives on it covers the rest of that deficit, right? So this ability to stack is also an important attribute to it. Now, bring your attention to heat pumps and heat pump water heater and some of the other technologies down here that actually increase your electricity, will increase your electricity load, especially if you're transitioning from gas. Uh, but there's other values that come with them that can be accounted for in the quote unquote savings to pay for the upgrade. So utilities don't have to just go by the savings, they can go by the value added to, say, the grid for having uh, 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 options for a virtual power plant, for uh, DERMS, distributed energy resource management systems, right? Like there's values that these technologies on a home level bring to the grid at the grid level that can be applied to the investment. Now, I talked about access to inclusive financing solutions. There's also a component of resilience to this, right? This idea of home batteries or bi-directional EV charging stations. A lot of people may not realize is that your electric vehicle, if you have it, depending on what type you have, can be plugged into your home and provide as a battery for your home. The Nissan Leaf can provide around 3 days worth of battery and energy for a home. The Ford Lightning can do about 5 days of battery, right? So if you have one of those vehicles, you can plug them into your home. You can have an electrician set up your panel where you can plug in home, and during an outage, you just plug your car in, and now you got power, right? Or you do a home battery. So all these are options that can be covered by the utility inclusive investment because it adds a value to them as well. It adds a value to the grid as well. No longer do we need to come on with high cost, high polluting carbon, high toxicity peaker plants. What if we could use batteries to reduce those peak moments and heating and cooling it throughout the year, saving the utility company millions of dollars a year, right? That's why it makes sense for them to do these types of investments at your home because it can save them millions of dollars in having to pay for high expensive uh, energy generation. So switching gears from inclusive financial solutions to I'm going to be presenting kind of a package that we offer around resiliency, revenue generating, and empowering local businesses and local workforce. But before I get to that, I want to set up the stage and talk to you about redlining. For if you aren't familiar with redlining already, please take the time to look it up. But essentially, it was the practice of separating certain communities based on race for uh, for preventing investment into those communities, right? And this was from a federal and local positioning of these were communities were seen as high risk due to them being Black communities. And you can see in Baltimore, image of Baltimore, the red areas right here, yellow being a little bit less risky, blue and green being less risky more, right? So the areas that were red and yellow weren't receiving any investment if at all, right? You couldn't get a loan from a bank if you lived in these areas because you were considered high risk. This is a map from 1937. Now let's take a look at where charging stations are in Baltimore, and you see quite a similar traction overlay of the areas that were red in 1937 are still the areas that don't have EV charging stations today. You could do that for heat island effect or for uh, uh, tree cover, right? And energy costs, energy, not energy, the energy use per square foot is probably going to be higher in these red areas as well because they didn't have the investment to maintain for infrastructure, right? So the houses are in less or quality repair. They need more repair. They weren't able to get it. So they're using more energy to maintain comfort in these homes. All these things come from policies such as redlining that exist today, right? And it's important to understand these contexts, this recognition equity components when you're creating solutions. So what our solution is what we call a clean energy hub. It brings resiliency, revenue generating, and community workforce. If you're familiar, we like to also call it a revenue generating microgrid. A microgrid is uh, a place that generates its own electricity and is able to store it to use it at will, right? So what we do is we work with community anchors. Uh, we define a community anchor as someone who is trusted by the community, who is active in the community and owns their own land. And we partner with them to create a clean energy hub. In this clean energy hub, there's going to be electrification of the building, energy efficiency, but also solar panels on the roof and the parking lot, and EV charging stations at the site. And we're targeting areas that were historically redlined because these are the places that need this infrastructure and can't afford it themselves. Excuse me. What also is a differentiator for what we are as developers versus others is that 80% of the revenue is going back into the community to help them decarbonize, to help them electrify their buildings and start to counteract the decades-long aspects and impacts of redlining on the infrastructure, on the households, uh, on the household building stock. In in contrast, right, you have this uh, most developers, the benefit is, oh, you get less energy bill. But the reality is, if there's no ownership combined to this, if there's no ability to generate revenue based on the value of these technologies, you're at risk of not being around. There was a church in Oakland that had solar in their rooftop and charging stations in their parking lot, and they closed
Mm,
because they weren't receiving any of that value. They just had a little bit discount in their energy bill. That kind of solution is not equitable. That kind of solution is not acceptable in our communities, right? And so this idea of generating revenue and then pumping that back out into local workforce, using local workforce to build this, training local people to be able to to install solar panels, using the money to help that reality occur creates this regenerative, it creates a feedback loop. More people have solar, more people have resiliency, more people have money in their pockets to do um, what is needed in their communities, right? All by normalizing this clean technology. And once it's normalized, the expectation is that I should have it too. And that is something that is greatly missing in in Black and brown communities today, is this sense that I should have solar too, right? And that is what we need. We need the sense that we should have it, that is normalized, that pastor's got an EV, why shouldn't I? Right? The church has induction stovetop. You go and you're cooking at your church and they got an induction stovetop. Now you get to see the benefits of induction stovetop. Let's get the gas out of our homes that are polluting our ourselves and our families, right? So some other benefits to the immediate benefits to a clean energy hub, not even counting the external benefits of the revenue that's generated from it, but 7 jobs created per clean energy hub. We're equipping local businesses with competitive additional contracts, right? So we're hiring local businesses to do this work, and we are improving accessibility of EV charging stations. Lastly, there's obviously the carbon reduction emissions and the particulate matter pollution reduction, which is significant in Black and brown communities who have a much higher risk of asthma due to environmental factors like the amount of heavy traffic areas, which was also a policy of where high traffic and highways were put through Black communities through the 50s and 60s, right? So these are all policies that are impacting us today that we can start to counteract with these type of solutions. And then lastly, I want to bring up something that I'm a big fan of from Majora Carter, who's a MacArthur Genius Awardee, this idea of self-gentrification, right? I highly recommend you read her book, Reclaiming Your Community. You don't have to move out of your neighborhood to live in a better one. That concept, I think, really resonates with me. And one of the things that she talks about is creating spaces people want to visit that are also community owned within your neighborhood, right? You shouldn't have to go somewhere to have a good time in another person's neighborhood and spending money there. You should be able to have it in your neighborhood, whether it's as simple as a coffee shop or a like a place like a bookstore or a place to go out and have fun, right? These should be not just in your neighborhood, but community owned. And we hope that the Clean Energy Hub effort is the foundation, the starting point to realize things like self gentrification. Thank you for your time. Once again, Anthony Kinslow with Gemini Energy Solutions. We provide commercial grade energy audits, software as a service. So any nonprofits or for-profit institutions who want to use our technology to do energy audits on their building spaces, we have to talk with you on that. Our clean energy hub development is happening across the country. And lastly, we are doing decarbonization master planning for places, and I've done this work for places like San Francisco International Airport and Morehouse College. So with that, thank you for the time and happy for any questions.
This was great, Dr. Kinslow. You can leave that slide up where your website is, and I'll go ahead and throw in your email address in post. But thank you so much for your presentation. This was awesome. I'd never heard of Majora Carter before, but I just found her on LinkedIn and went ahead and sent a request. Her book sounds awesome. I need to pick it up. So I've got more questions than we have time, unfortunately. But my first question is, how did your experience at the Park School, being a Park School graduate, right here in Baltimore County, 5, 10 minutes away from where I live, how did that experience prepare you to be doing what you're doing right now and being where you are right now?
I often forget to credit Park School, but I attended Park School from first grade all the way through 12th grade and had an amazing experience, have lifelong friends from those times. I think the biggest thing from Park School was one, my interest in climate and addressing climate change came my junior year at Park School, where we watched an Inconvenient Truth, right?
Mm,
Um, but the other is the ability to ask questions, right? And be encouraged to ask questions and not to assume that just because something is the way it is that's the way it should be. At Park School, right, we I don't think we had at the time I was there was a deep conversation about race, but there wasn't avoidance of it either, right? It was just if it came up, it came up. Uh, we had the ability to get together, Black men's group that we got together and we talked about what it was like being, sometimes isolated. But Park School supported those kind of efforts, and which I thought was important. So I do have fond memories of Park School, and really credit it for kind of introducing me to what is now my passion and life work.
absolutely. Absolutely. Shout out to the Park School here in Baltimore County representing. The map that you showed, the red line map, here in Baltimore, Dr. Lawrence Brown from Morgan State University wrote a book. We call it The Black Butterfly and the White L.
Mm,
You described exactly what it was, probably without realizing it, right? And Dr. Brown's research will be presented as part of Climate Tech
nice.
2025. So I definitely encourage everyone to check that out. But and he's created a GIS map based on kind of the inequities here in Baltimore, which is and they launched it here on the at the conference. So that's pretty amazing. But it was interesting because I was in Sandtown, Winchester yesterday doing some 3D documenting with my LiDAR camera, and I was passing by Gilmore Homes.
Mm,
And for those that know, Gilmore Homes is the community where Freddie Gray lived and was unfortunately murdered a few years back prior to that uprising. But as I was going through the community, I noticed that there was a little small car with an extension cord coming out of Gilmore Homes into the car, plugging in to charge up their car because it was an electric car. And then this morning, I was like, okay, I Googled how many charging stations, how many EV charging stations are there in 21217 zip code, and I couldn't find any. And the map that you showed is the 21217 zip code, and there are no chargings, there are no pins in that. And so it's so funny that you should bring up that map today because I was just Googling that this morning to try to find where they are. Um, so So is that, I mean, what's is it, creating these clean energy resilience hubs within these communities? Is that the way that we get more amenities like charging stations into these communities, or is there a different pathway that you think?
yeah, I think it's important to understand that the folks who historically the last 10 years or so who have been putting the EV infrastructure into place, they have kind of parameters for what they look for to for what areas they decide to place their charging stations. And historically red line areas often don't fit, excuse me, those parameters. All right. So if we're depending on the private sector, we're going to be in trouble. The
Mm,
public sector, we had a lot of money coming down to do some of this work, and that's all been frozen with this new administration.
mhm,
So really, if you want charging in your community, you need to kind of find a way for private public partnerships, or what we're providing, which is developers who have an equity mindset and want to partner with local community anchors, whether that be the church or a nonprofit or what have you, to put in this infrastructure and not just extract all the value of it because they're doing it. Right.
mhm,
And so I do think that our solution is one that is most effective. in terms of community ownership and value for the community.
Thank you for that. Another standout in your presentation was the community ownership and equity model, which I think is new. It's exciting to see that because communities are looking for more equity, more ownership into this. My last question are just kind of barriers to adoption question in regards to the inclusive utility investment solution, otherwise known as on-bill financing. I guess my first question is, does Baltimore Gas and Electric, BGE, participate in the solution? And then it also sounds like the perfect solution for legacy homeowners in historically redlined communities.
Totally agree. And no, right now, BG&E does not, Baltimore Gas and Electric does not participate in this, and I would highly recommend everyone ask them to. There are
Mhm.
plenty of examples of utilities from small cooperatives to large uh, utilities who are implementing this today, right? All of California is looking at it on their Public Utilities Commission is reviewing it for making it mandatory across all of California. New York is looking at it. Minnesota is looking at it, right? So there are major areas that are looking at that or are already implementing this. And I think if BG&E and parent company Exelon is serious about um, energy efficiency, serious about kind of working towards addressing the market and decarbonizing their infrastructure, then this is the best way and the fastest way they can do so. Um, the and there was a second part to your question, but
Yeah,
I
the
was
second part was just I thought this would be a perfect solution for legacy homeowners in historically redlined communities, the on-bill financing or the inclusive utility investment solution that you were mentioning.
yeah, and I will caution typically just use tariff on bill. On bill financing typically means that the financing is still attached to the customer.
Ah,
Tariff on
mm,
bill is where you it's a tariff on the bill and it's stuck to the meter. So those
hmm
are a slight distinction there. Uh,
hmm
but yes, legacy. uh, Quite frankly, one of the reasons why I love this solution is that it prioritizes the homes that have had the least work done, right? Because the
hmm
higher the energy savings potential, the more you can invest in it,
hmm
right? And so by doing a comprehensive retrofit on these legacy buildings, you can have significant 60% reductions in energy, right? 60, 70% reduction in energy. And the cost is not much more than if you were doing like a large, um, you know, high-end home, but the
hmm
savings are significantly higher.
hmm hmm
And so it actually starts to lean yourself more to targeting these red line areas because they are a better fit for the program.
Mm, interesting, interesting. Well, I know that the Constellation does have an on-bill financing
hmm
retrofit solution for commercial property. So
hmm
maybe it's just a matter of time before
They have the
trickles down.
capacity to do this, right? Like
Yeah.
all you need to do is be able to, like on-bill financing is for commercial customers, they take out a loan
Right.
uh, on the bill and it's paid back automatically on the bill, right?
Right. hmm
California does this as well. A bunch of other places does this, and
hmm
and
hmm
that's, but once again, that's debt.
Right.
Commercial more likely be comfortable with debt
Right.
if there's a bottom business line. But
hmm
people today, I mean, no one wants to take on debt,
Yeah.
especially
No.
for energy efficiency. Like you mean for weatherize to add insulation to my roof, I got to take on debt. Like
Right.
that's a non-starter.
Right.
And so this idea of utilities benefiting from this, so they pay the upfront cost because they can afford to, is a really, I think, something that just makes sense.
Dr. Anthony Kinslow, this is your second year participating in Baltimore Climate Tech. We greatly appreciate you, man. Thank you so much for your subject matter expertise, your thought leadership. We really appreciate you, man. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, have a good one.